Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're totally dismantling that old Hollywood myth of the table-pounding business negotiation. Instead, we're going to build a structured, collaborative framework for global deals. When we think of international negotiations, we usually picture this high-stakes, sweaty-palmed battle of wills, right? But the actual research, it shows that the best deals are really the result of careful planning, understanding the psychological dynamics at play, and, crucially, adapting to cultural nuances. So, looking at our agenda for today, we're going to cover four main areas. First up, the negotiation background. Second, managing the atmosphere. Third, the three-stage process. And we'll wrap up with cultural and strategic factors. Let's get right into it. Before we even look at the specific variables of our framework, we really have to shift our paradigm. Take a look at this quote from Nadell. He says, "Your very first step should be to rid yourself of an adversarial position. It's a real game changer. You and your counterpart, you actually have a mutual problem to solve, and you're going to solve it to your mutual advantage. Honestly, only amateurs try to force a deal that isn't mutually beneficial. The pros always consider the realities of building a long-term, sustainable partnership." All right, Section 1, the negotiation background, laying the foundation. Think of this as your mental checklist for preparation. These are the background factors that can absolutely make or break your deal. Take market position, for instance. If one side holds a monopoly, well, that completely changes the pressure in the room. And you really can't forget about third parties. In global deals, you're almost never just negotiating with a buyer or seller. You've got governments, agents, consultants, and they all have their own agendas, like maybe boosting local employment or managing foreign exchange rates. Those hidden factors can completely shift the whole dynamic of your deal. Now, what makes this dynamic so incredibly tricky is that common and conflicting objectives are always sitting right there at the table together. You both want a successful transaction, sure, that's a common objective. But let's be real, profit to one side is literally a cost to the other. The big takeaway here is that your chances of actually reaching an agreement absolutely plummet when those conflicting objectives start dominating the relationship. You've got to actively work to expand on your common interests. Moving on to Section 2, managing the atmosphere. Navigating the climate. Okay, the absolutely crucial thing to grasp here is that the negotiation atmosphere is entirely psychological. It's the perceived vibe or milieu around the whole interaction. In international deals, the perception of reality is honestly way more important than the reality itself. If the other party perceives conflict, even if you totally didn't intend it, guess what? That perceived conflict just became the absolute reality of your negotiation atmosphere. And that is exactly why the pre-negotiation stage, which we'll cover in just a second, is so laser-focused on building a cooperative climate. Just notice the push and pull happening here. Your ability to steer a relationship mostly comes from perceived power and your access to information. But power is fundamentally tied to dependence. I mean, if one party literally has no other alternatives, they're highly dependent, and bam, your power dynamic is totally unbalanced. A perfectly balanced, healthy working relationship means both parties need to perceive that they have equal power and equal alternatives. All right, into Section 3 we go, the three-stage process, building the deal. We can actually break this complex and, frankly, sometimes overwhelming interaction down into three highly actionable stages. We've got pre-negotiation, the face-to-face phase, and post-negotiation. Let's see how this whole thing builds step by step. It might surprise you, but this first stage, pre-negotiation, is very often the most critical part of an international relationship. It's kind of like an insider secret, where informal social contacts lay the actual groundwork for trust. Way before you ever sit across a mahogany table to haggle over prices, you need to jointly define the problem. This is the time to gather your market info, explicitly figure out who holds the power, and formulate your initial strategy. Actually, if you sense a ton of conflict or really doubt the future of the relationship during this early trust-building phase, it is usually best to just walk away before formal negotiations even kick off. Now, I really want to highlight this specific pitfall because, man, it trips up so many people. In some countries, especially in the public sector, buyers will toss out a letter of award or a letter of intent right after this pre-negotiation stage. And Western negotiators constantly mistake this for a done deal, like it's a finalized grant of contract. But no way. That is a super dangerous assumption. It literally just means they intend to negotiate further. You still have a lot of work to do, folks. So as we transition into stage 2, the face-to-face talks, you've got to remember this golden rule. Whoever arranges the agenda controls the negotiation process. Setting the agenda lets you spotlight your own strengths and, yeah, maybe put the other party on the defensive for a bit. But keep in mind there's always a trade-off. Doing this does reveal your position in advance, which basically hands them the time to prepare their counter-arguments. Once you're face to face, you're basically walking a tightrope between being firm and being flexible. So, how do you actually pull that off? By using conditional signals. Instead of just flat out saying no, you say something like, well, we agree your equipment is suitable, but just not at that price. See? That protects your limits without entirely slamming the door on exchanging concessions. And for the flexibility side of things, keep an eye out for unquantifiable trade-offs. Maybe you take a slightly lower profit margin today in exchange for a strategic entry into a massive, protected market tomorrow. Then we hit our final stage, post-negotiation. Honestly, writing the actual contract language can turn into a whole new negotiation by itself, because meanings and values can differ so wildly across borders. Trouble almost always pops up during implementation if everyone was just too eager to sign the paper and hit the airport. So a really skilled negotiator will summarize everything out loud to test for true understanding. They'll ask something like, okay, do we understand correctly that if we repay the credit within 3 years, you will reduce the price by 7%? Get that explicit verbal confirmation before you ever leave the table.
And that brings us to Section 4, Cultural and Strategic Factors, the human element.
You have to be prepared for some pretty stark cultural differences. Just take the concept of time, for example. In Western cultures, we constantly hear time is money, right? That leads to a very fast, highly punctual pace. But in a lot of emerging markets, time is viewed as highly flexible. If you bring a rigid, super rushed approach into those regions, you might deeply irritate your partner. The same goes for behavior. Are they looking out for individual benefits, or are they aiming for a collective, team-based solution? You absolutely must adapt your strategy based on these nuances. Even basic vocabulary can completely derail a deal. These specific examples perfectly highlight why you have to read between the lines and tailor your message. I mean, to an American, an octopus has arms, but to someone in Japan, it has legs. In Sweden, if you say next Sunday, it means the Sunday after this upcoming one. But say that in India, and it means this coming Sunday. If you don't adjust your communication to make sure you're truly understood, these tiny assumptions about everyday words will cause massive confusion and totally erode that cooperative atmosphere we just worked so hard to build. You also need to intentionally choose between a tough or soft approach based on your counterpart's specific culture and how they make decisions. A tough strategy means you come in with a high initial offer, you take a firm stance, and you basically wait for them to cave first. A soft strategy, on the other hand, starts moderate, and you offer up the first concession hoping to kickstart some reciprocity. The real trick here is gathering enough intel during that pre-negotiation stage to figure out exactly which strategy your counterpart is running so you can adapt yours to complement it. Ultimately, you really have to ask yourself this one crucial question. Are you willing to walk away? A successful outcome isn't just about getting any deal. It's about getting a deal that actually meets your firm's objectives and survives the reality of implementation. Honestly, sometimes having no agreement at all is far, far better than being stuck in a bad one that just brings you headaches down the road. So the next time you sit across that table, ask yourself, are you negotiating to build a sustainable partnership, or are you just trying to win an argument?